Okay, so I got a question. I've got a question from on my YouTube page from Mighty Investor, and then he says he wants to add two thoughts. He says, I have found that when I just relax into the Tao, it is super relaxing, but I don't get very much done. It doesn't seem terribly valuable unless you want to float along in life. If you want to get real, if you want to have real goals, actually, what if you have real goals you want to achieve? It seems drive, discipline, concrete goals, and yes, even a little ambition are needed. Another concept that is relevant here is momentum. It seems a certain amount of will might be needed to get through the initial inertia to build up momentum. I welcome your thoughts if you have time, but I totally get if you don't, friend. Thank you, Mighty Investor. That's a fantastic question. And so the fundamental point we're getting to is really the perception of the individual and the who, which is doing something. And there's a point in meditation, certainly early on, where there's going to be willpower and determination and I'm going to be here. For example, if you look at a beginning gymnast and a master gymnast, the master gymnast is using less effort in the process. So there's a process of cutting away, and the effort that they have is highly refined and clear, whereas the beginner is clumsy and bumbling along and that sort of thing, and using much more energy than maybe would otherwise be necessary. With the meditation process, I find it's really, really good to think of the phrase in the Book of Tao, which is, be like a warrior in enemy territory. That the perception of that statement will depend on the reader and what a reader understands of what it means to be a warrior. This is most easily conveyed through the martial arts that I teach, because the way most martial arts works is there's a kind of, we think of awareness, or we think of being a warrior. There's this kind of readiness and anxiety, really what it is, like an anticipation. And that's completely not the approach of a true master. A true master is actually very calm and centered, highly aware, but not in a highly effortful way. It's a crystal clear presence, and it doesn't take any more effort than it takes to simply be, to be awake, for example. To be awake doesn't take a lot of effort. So when the attack comes, because there's less cycles going on in the brain, the attempt to anticipate, the attempt to interpret actions, the stimulus going through the eye goes directly into movement without all of that anxiety. And it creates a calm movement that's very hard to read and hard to perceive. Unless one has actually felt it or experienced it multiple times, people don't get it. Once you've experienced it a number of times, it starts to sink in. Well, there is really another way. It's mudan noho. It's in Japanese. Mudan means non-effort way. Really what it means is less effort way, because you can't actually accomplish any movement in life without a minimal amount of effort. Again, we're talking yin yo ho, or the yin and the yang. So even in a yin perspective or movement, there's a little bit of yang. Even in a yang perspective or movement, there's a little bit of yin. So there's a little bit of effort in everything, no matter what is occurring. So when what I refer to as being willful is anything that's over and above what is absolutely necessary. And by that perception, as the brain repatterns and nervous system repatterns to deal with life with less and less effort, what is the amount that is necessary also becomes less and less. So what you originally perceive as being necessary is much more than what will be necessary later on in the process. So quite naturally, early on, there's going to be a certain amount of willfulness. What we want is to have less willfulness each time, a little bit less. A statement that I tend to use while teaching is never more than 10% focus on anything. Relax more and more into the process. The second essential point is that the fundamental approach to meditation that I take, it really does come from that warrior perception, that the warrior in enemy territory, he's not closed off his awareness and gone into an exclusive inner awareness. Instead, there's an awareness that comes from the term "comes from" is not appropriate here. It's hard to explain. So initially, it will be perceived this way. It comes from the very center of being and expands out or extends to all that is. That's the awareness we're talking about initially. Later on, that perception also shifts. But for now, that will be how the meditation works. I describe this type of meditation very well in experience, and so it's important to understand that the meditations that were explained through experience are the way they are for a very specific reason, and that's so that a certain shift can occur where we're no longer separating the inner world from the external world, that meditation is no longer a retreat, which is how most meditations are. I often dislike talking about other meditations because I know it is perceived as if I'm dissing other traditions, or it sounds arrogant that I would say that my way is superior. Well, first, it's not my way. This is just actually in alignment with the reality of all that is. This is not disconnected from all this. It is part of all that is. That's not my philosophy. Has nothing to do with the individual. It's just a reality. The mind perceives this as being separate and then identifies this as being me and that as being other. And any meditation that is focused internally on me, at its very basis, is coming at meditation from the paradigm that me is separate from other. And so basically the realization that I had and that is being passed on through these teachings is that fundamental perception at its very basic level is flawed. And the approach of meditation that is inward to exclusion becomes dysfunctional. It is dysfunctional. You relax more and more, and what ends up occurring is awareness pulls in, and then there's very little capacity for the body to function in the world, to, as you describe it, to achieve things and that sort of thing. Whereas this approach of be like a warrior in enemy territory, this awareness that's from here, that extends out in every direction, that is also relaxed, an incredible inspiration starts to flow through, and embracing of life that allows for activity in the world, great productivity, great realignment of values and direction, a certain guidance that is, we describe it as an inner guidance, but it's really a guidance that is in context with all that is, so it can't rightly be described as an inner guidance, but we have to use some words early on. And so the meditations that I teach are in that context of the totality. And when practice, what ends up occurring is it's like windows. You have a forward window. It's maybe something you have to focus on. Maybe you got to write a check or do some math or whatever. But in the background, there is the larger image or larger picture that's going on that can be felt. And then when awareness, when the need not to focus is there on a specific task, that just comes to the foreground. And then the specifics are they're in the center of the foreground. So I may be looking at somebody and talking at them. I'm not really looking at them. I'm seeing them in the center of my field of vision that is inclusive of all that is that my field of vision can contain. So it's a fundamentally different approach to using the senses. We have habitual tendency to focus to exclusion. And so this is including the inner awareness, the external awareness, the specific external thing, and the total external thing. There really is no inner and external, but we have to use some words. Again, the more that we practice this, the more we realize how actually functional it is. And so I'm in my books or in my teachings, I use the word meditation, but you could just pull out meditation and substitute in awareness, specific and unconditioned awareness. Because the type of meditation I teach has both a meditative quality and this awareness or functional quality. So awareness is a good word, so long as we pull out the anxiety from the meaning. And this is one of the big challenges with words, because we all have what I call meaning associations with words. If a person uses the word surrender, well, 1,000 people have 1,000 different meanings of that, and most of our associated meanings with that word surrender are not positive. First question is, who is surrendering? Well, that's a rabbit hole in itself. So I tend to be very, very careful about the use of words and warn about these potential misunderstandings. Retreat is another one. We tend to retreat into meditation. The approach that I'm passing on is not about retreating at all. It's an embracing of all that is, simultaneously releasing of all that is. So a retreat is not the approach. That's a passive. It's an indication that we've been overwhelmed by the world, so we retreat from it. Whereas we're going to a place that actually creates a more capable individual, an individual that's capable of handling greater pressures and greater interaction with the world without the need to retreat. I hope that answers the questions. But with regards to willfulness and persistence, the easiest way to see the difference is how a child or an infant learns to walk. They're not doing it willfully, like, I'm going to do this. And there's none of that. It's an instinctive inspiration that flows through them that they just keep doing it. They may fall and cry and all that stuff, but they just get back up and do it again a little bit later. And it just keeps happening until success. And that's the way that they gain momentum. They're not thinking, I need to gain momentum. Although it wouldn't be wrong, if you wanted to think that way, it's unnecessary. But as awareness starts to take in the totality, this persistent approach, kind of like a baby, starts to happen with everything that we do that is of value to all that is, or totally useful, or certainly more useful than the isolated self perspective. And so this is not philosophy. So if we talk about persistence as a philosophy, that's not what I mean. I mean it's a completely different way in which the brain and the nervous system perceive the world, and the way that direction and inspiration and guidance comes through the body. And the more that these things come through, because of the awareness of context, the totality, the inner and the outer being, this connected continuum, quite naturally, it gets easier and easier to do over time. And that's the momentum that I speak of. Whereas willfulness is a self-centered approach, as if I am separate from the accomplishment, I am separate from the world, I am separate from all these things, and I have to push my way through. And so that's how I differentiate the two. My definitions of words cannot be exactly the same as dictionary definitions for that reason, because I'm coming at this from a unique paradigm, or a very different paradigm from which words have been written in the past. Words have been written in the past always from the paradigm of the individual perspective, looking at an external world. I'm seeing things from fundamentally a different perspective. a lot of this, again, comes down to experience. I used to have a rule that I would not teach anything until the individual had grounded experience on the topic. And usually if someone asked a question, I would direct them to the experience that would help them to find the answer. We're now at a place on the planet where that's not really going to, that's not going to jive. Got to find a better way, and that's where the YouTube videos come from. If this is just me working with one person physically, that's just not going to it's not going to pan out well for the totality. So we're working towards greater exposure to these things, and there's a greater reliance on the audience who's authentically interested in having their own exploration of this topic, an authentic exploration of this topic, which will require follow through, which initially, because we're seeing things from the self perspective, will require a certain amount of willfulness. Again, little by little over a period of time, we reduce willfulness while including the total perspective. And that helps. Now, it's important when I say the total perspective, I don't mean that you are seeing and feeling everything. I mean, that's the intention. That is the attention. It's not required that you actually feel the butterfly flap its wings on the other side of the planet. But it is required that the attention goes in every direction unconditionally. The intention, the attention. So, okay, that brings me to news. I've got a seminar coming up on June 1st, 2nd, and 3rd that will go into meditation, and this will be necessarily is a huge aspect of that seminar. It's just a small handful of people that will be getting together. I will be videoing it. This will be the first time I will be putting a video up about it, but I will be videoing this seminar and making it available for a nominal fee. Sorry, my phone's going off. For a nominal fee, and hopefully that will help clarify things. I don't really know the technology to do all that, but I'll see if I can't figure it out. And if I come up with something good, I'll make it available. I hope that answers your question, mighty investor, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you. Bye-bye.